Okay, this is the installation video for the long-range extended runtime fuel kit for the Yamaha EF2400. Installation is fairly simple on this particular generator. Pull this end cover off. Trying to avoid dropping the screws. You notice that the screws on the end cover are different than the ones on the back cover. The ones on this end cover simply have a flat washer on them. Now this end cover, pull out just a little bit at the top, and then there's a snap about halfway down, and I just put a flat blade screwdriver in it to pop this snap here out. And all it does is it pushes into this slot in the aluminum housing. And take a moment to make sure that the foam gasket has not been pulled out of place. If it is, just tuck it back into place. The back cover comes off with 2 screws also. You'll notice the screws in the back cover actually have a shoulder on them, as opposed to a washer. Pop the back cover off. Just get your fingertips under the edge of it, and there are 2 more snaps on this. I just take a flat blade screwdriver and pop loose. And that's this snap here and this snap here. And of course the top is just 2 tabs that slide straight up into the back of the aluminum cover. There's a 10mm bolt right here. It holds a fuel tank bracket in place. You'll remove this bolt. This bolt will not be reused. Simply discard it. Then there's a bolt right here that goes from the fuel tank down in to this chrome bracket. And we're just going to loosen this bolt up about 3 or 4 times. Once you've got this bolt loosened up, you'll notice this chrome bracket right here that is touching the aluminum housing. You just take the chrome bracket and push it straight back. So now there's actually a gap big enough for you to put your finger between this aluminum housing and this chrome bracket here. That's as good a place as any to take a break. Take the fuel pump that's included in the kit, the bolt and flat washer that are included in the kit. Put the flat washer right up against the front of the fuel pump. The fuel pump will be slid behind the aluminum and in front of the steel house or steel bracket for the fuel tank. So that the purpose of the flat washer is simply to move the fuel pump back about 1.5 millimeters. tighten down this bolt, and then go back and now tighten down the bolt that holds the fuel tank to the bracket. The next step is going to be to remove the valve cover. That's held on by 4 bolts, one at each corner. Simply slide the crankcase breather line out of place. That's probably as good a place as any. Go ahead and take a break. Okay, when you get the valve cover off, you'll need to separate the breather plate from the valve cover housing itself. The easiest way to do that is just to slide a flat blade screwdriver in this hole and simply pry down on it just a little bit, and it pops the breather plate right out. The breather plate has a reed valve in it, and all this is for positive crankcase ventilation, which goes through this hose. We're going to disable this valve because normally it allows pressure only, and to run the pulse pump we need pressure and vacuum. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to bend it up sharply right here, so that now the valve stays open all the time. And that's just done with my finger. Just push it up and push it tight against that stop. So now it's going to stay wide open. We will be installing an external positive crankcase ventilation valve later. And now simply push the 2 halves of the valve cover back together. The kit will come with a new valve cover gasket. This is a brand new engine. There's no damage to the valve cover gasket. If you do damage the valve cover gasket though, use the replacement gasket that comes with the kit. This is the stock breather hose, along with the hose that goes to the emissions canister. So what I'm going to do is put a hose into this hole where the original breather tube went, and then it's going to split. One half is going to go around through a new PCV valve, and in here the other one is going to go directly to the pulse port on the fuel pump. The way that's done, the kit will come with several feet of 1/4 inch fuel line. Cut a piece 1 inch long and slide it onto the T-fitting that's included with the kit. Incidentally, you must keep the stock T-fitting in this location hooked up this way, because Yamaha has put a restrictor jet into the line that goes to the emissions canister, and you don't want to tamper with that. So now, take the new T-fitting that you just made up and push it into the valve cover right where the breather port originally went. Then take another piece of fuel line, cut it to 12 inches long. Take the new valve. You notice that one half is flat and the other half is domed. If you'll look, you can see a very fine arrow cast into it that points this direction. If you have any doubts in your mind, just blow through it. You'll have air travel through one way, but not the other. You cannot blow this way, but you can blow this way. And that's because the arrow is pointing on there that's the direction of travel. So now, I'm going to put the valve in this hose and connect the hose back up to the stock location. So you can see that now, where you used to have the stock one-way valve built into the valve cover breather plate so that it would only force air one direction through this hose, we're now getting air only one direction through this hose, but this hose will have it pulsing both directions. We're going to take this, pull it around, and connect it right to the bottom connector on the T. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and put a zip tie around the stand for the throttle control valve so that it holds this hose nice and securely. Okay, like I had stated earlier, the T-fitting that's in this is the stock Yamaha one, and do not change it out because there is a restrictor orifice. This short piece of hose that goes into the valve cover is cut to approximately 1 inch long. This long piece of hose is cut to 12 inches long, and then this is the new PCV valve. Now, take another piece of 1/4 inch hose, cut to approximately 16 inches, and put it on to the third port of the T-fitting that we have installed. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zip tie it to the bottom loop of the fuel pump, because you're going to bend it around and put it onto the pulse port. And when you bend it, you don't want this hose to accidentally touch the choke shaft. So that's why I'm going to zip tie it to the bottom of the fuel pump right here. It just keeps it from wandering around on you. Then I'm going to route this in a loop and plug it onto the bottom, or excuse me, the pulse port of the fuel pump. Now all the hoses that we have connected up so far are just pulling air. That's all that flows through all of these, is just air. This is the fuel output from the pump, and this is the fuel input to the pump. So this one will hook to the carburetor, and this one will go to a T-fitting so that you've got one orifice or one lead going to the external tank and the other lead going to the stock tank. That's probably as good a place as any to take a break for a moment. Okay, this hose that goes to the pulse port on the fuel pump is actually touching this aluminum bracket. So I'm going to loosen up the bolt we installed earlier, rotate the fuel pump just a little bit so that this hose now does not actually touch. Next item is to disconnect the stock fuel line from the stock fuel selector valve. So now, take the fuel filter that's included in the kit. Make sure which way it's pointing. There's an arrow on the side of the fuel filter, and it points in the direction of fuel flow, which will be towards the carburetor. So slide that into the stock fuel hose and position the clamp in place. What you'll do is take the hose that used to route over here, and I'll just route it right down between the inverter unit and the air box. This way it'll be visible from the back, which is where you get out the air filter to service it, the valve cover to adjust the valves, spark plug, and so forth. Got another piece of 1/4-inch hose, 14 inches long, and hook it onto the output port of the fuel pump. And the other side goes to the other end of the fuel filter. I'm going to trim about 1 inch off of this. I don't want this to be pushed into a kink. I want it to stay the stock factory bend. Actually, it's going to be about 1.5 inches off of it. Once you get everything fitted into place, look at it, and if any of the hoses look like they're crimped, go ahead and change that immediately. Don't wait for testing it to see if it runs, only then to discover that yes, indeed, the fuel line is kinked. Okay? This will just barely have enough room to clear this cover, and this will clear this cover. Actually, I don't like that. I'm going to shorten it just a little bit more. Okay, on the EF2400, I'm going to be using a straight style fuel fitting. The only reason why I'm using a straight style is the Yamaha EF2400 lends itself very well to having the fuel fitting mounted right under the recoil start rope. When you drill the hole, you pull the recoil start rope out. You can see where the center of this is. You will center it so that the attachment line, as opposed to the fuel line, is almost directly underneath the hole for the recoil start rope. The reason is then the hose barb on the other side will line up between the inverter unit and the recoil start housing. These kits will normally come with this fitting and the nylon hose barb. If you would prefer, I can send you this kit instead of, send you these parts as opposed to those. When you go to the shopping cart and check out, there's a section on there for special comments. If you'd prefer this system to that, just say so there. However, this cannot be mounted down in here because it goes on at 90 degrees and you cannot get the fuel hose on. If you choose this, you'll need to mount it out here or in the end or something like that, and then it'll stick out past the normal body lines of the generator. And that's why I like this system better, because it's recessed in there completely. But at any rate, so I'm going to make a small mark. Directly in line with the bottom of the hole for the recoil start. if you look at it, the place where we're going to drill the hole is going to be about 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters to the left of the center line that we were just looking at. I use a step drill only because it's quick and easy. The step drills are more expensive than a standard drill bit, so if you've already got standard drill bits, do not purchase one of these. The other drawback to these is that if you drill too deep, it's now drilled to too large of a hole. I've got the hole drilled. Now I'm just going to use a repairman's reamer, and this is strictly for deburring. Okay. The kits are going to come with a roll of Teflon tape. Teflon tape is pretty straightforward to operate. Just wrap it around the threads. And when you do wrap it around the threads, don't overlap the end, because if you do overlap the end of it, then you got a piece of Teflon tape that is very likely to get torn loose and end up in your fuel system somewhere. And by somewhere, I mean wherever it will do the most damage. It's just the way luck goes. You don't have to crank down real tight on these. Keep in mind that both parts are nylon or plastic, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure Moeller fuel fittings would explain to you that it's a polyacetyl resin or some other $5 word. So now when you've got the fitting installed, it'll look like this. It's fairly tight to the recoil start mechanism, but it does have enough room because you're not going to be grabbing it with a full fist. But remember, you'll have the fuel hose right here, so you'll have to pull the recoil start mechanism out and then go ahead and pull on it hard. But this way, If you look from this direction, the fuel fitting does not stick out past the normal body lines of the generator. That's probably a good place to take a break. Okay, you'll tighten the hose bar down to the fuel fitting until it pinches the plastic so it doesn't rock around. Don't tighten it down too tight. Keep in mind it is only a nylon fitting. Next, you'll take the second T-fitting. It's included in the kit, and this is identical to the T-fitting that you used on the pulse port. Take two hoses, 1/4 inch, cut to 11 inches each. Attach the first one to the bottom of the T-fitting. Route it underneath the hose that goes from the carburetor to the fuel filter. Push the opposite end of it onto the hose barb that we just installed. Like so. Take your second piece of hose, cut to 11 inches. Attach one end to the fuel selector valve. Then take the T-fitting and position it right here in front of the airbox. Make sure that the hose doesn't stick out past the fuel tank, because remember, you're going to have a plastic cover that goes on this when you're done. And I'm going to have to trim about 1 inch off the end of this hose, because it's just slightly longer than I'd like it to be. Keeping in mind I initially cut it to 11 inches. And I do recommend you cutting them to 11 inches and then trimming them later, as opposed to cutting it to what you think it'll be. So now you've got one hose going from the inlet for the remote tank, the other end going from the stock fuel selector valve. Now we have to run a short piece of hose from the third port on this T-fitting up to the inlet port on the fuel pump. What we'll do is we'll take a piece of hose, cut to approximately 8 inches, and I'm going to attach to the fuel pump first. And now, if I come over here, I can see how much room I've got to work with. And I'm going to end up cutting approximately 1.5 inches off of the end of this. Okay, that's probably as good a place as any to take a short break. Okay, the next step is going to be to make sure that everything is in such a way that it'll allow the covers to go back on nicely. Take one of the zip ties included in the kit and just zip tie the pulse line to the fuel pump output hose, which kind of keeps them nicely attached there. I don't see anything else sticking out of this side severely. And this side will close over the cover too, or the cover will close over it. Now once you've examined everything and made sure that there are no hoses that are pinched or in a position where they're going to be rubbing against anything, and start putting hose clamps on all the fuel lines. This is fuel output coming from the fuel pump. And I'm going to put the hose clamp so that the latching portion of it is facing away from the cover. This is a fuel input. And again, I've got the latch away from the cover. This is just an air hose, and if you notice, the stock hoses are slip fit on there. If you want, there are plenty of hose clamps. You can put a hose clamp on the air lines too if you get confused and you don't remember which one is air and which one is fuel. Obviously, going into the fuel filter here is a fuel line. And here where the fuel T is, you can have 3 hose clamps. Then where the fuel fitting goes through to the hose barb, put a clamp on that. Then with the stock fuel selector valve, there's the hose coming out of that. Put a clamp here. Like I said, the kit comes with plenty of hose clamps, so if you break some, don't worry about it. There's extras. Or if you want to go back and put hose clamps on all the air lines, you can do that too. Trust me, the pulse on the air lines is not where you're going to have any leaks. But by all means, if it makes you feel better, go ahead and put clamps on that. That's probably as good a place as any to take a break. Okay. Now that we've got everything in position, we can go ahead and put the covers back on. The end cover, we tuck into the groove at the end of the generator, and then just push the two snaps into place. Remember, the end cover uses the screws that just have flat washers instead of the ones with the shoulders on them. The rear cover, we tuck the top of it in first, so that these two tabs in the top of it go into the aluminum. Then we push the snaps on each end into place, and it's held on with the bolts or the screws that have the shoulders on them. About the only thing to do now is pick a location to put the instruction decal. I'm going to go ahead and put this one on the back of the generator. And this simply states how to use the remote tank in case the person operating it is not the same person that installed it. Okay. We'll go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and start it up.